Now then, you're welcome back. So delighted to say we have Conor Niland, Davis Cup captain, and also flogging his guts out in an office these days in studio. Hello.
Hello, Joe. How are you?
You're in the real world now, my friend.
Yeah, big bad world. Have been for a few years now, actually, getting used to it.
Don't worry. Eventually, when you get worn down enough, it becomes okay.
Yeah, you just accept it. Accept your fate.
So Australian Open is on. We might start with the men's draw at the moment. I was just looking at the general landscape of the women's side of the draw and the men's. If we start with the men's, the short version is not much has changed. So I was looking at major Grand Slam winners over the last 2 years. We have Nadal, of the 8 of them, winning 3, French Open twice and last year's US Open. We have Djokovic with 4 of the last 8, including the Australian Open last year. And we have Federer with the 2018 Australian Open after his 2 Grand Slam wins in 2017. So Nadal, 3 of the 8, Djokovic, 4 of the 8, and Federer, 1 of the 8. Will the next 4 be any different?
Don't think so. If you look at Nadal's year last year, it was 2008 or 2009. He single-handedly won the Davis Cup for Spain at the end of the year when he traditionally falls off. He finished the year number 1. He won the US. He won the French. He lost final. So it's the same old thing. And Federer still managing his schedule and hasn't had much of a pre-season coming into this, hasn't played any competitive stuff, but he's looking good as of yesterday's first round. So
is he? At 38, Federer's line coming into the tournament was, "Don't expect much from me here."
Yeah, I mean, take that with a pinch of salt. He looks a good nick. He's the same age as Serena, and they're both in the mix, top 3. You would have thought on either side of the draw. So. Djokovic was very impressive against Nadal in the final of the ATP Cup last week, which is a new event that the ATP have brought in. It's a team competition, a little bit like the Davis Cup, but through over the course of a week. And that was an interesting format. But the same 2 lads, Djokovic and Nadal at the end, and then Djokovic was that little bit better than Nadal and tends to do very well in Australia. So I would have put him slightly ahead of Nadal, even though Nadal had such a great year last year. But yeah, Federer maybe just behind those guys. You've obviously got that sub-tier of the Tsitsipas, Zverev, Rublev, these sort of 21 to 23-year-old guys who have had good years and are improving. But then when it kind of comes to the really big events, haven't quite done it. And Tsitsipas won the Tour Finals in London in November, which is a big deal. But at the same time, it's still not, the guys aren't at their full pitch for that, I don't think, even if they really want to win it, but they're just not quite there. It's the end of the season, etc.
Yeah. It's amazing, really, the big 4 as it was and now the big 3 saw off the next generation very comfortably, and now they're not doing a bad job of keeping even the young lads at bay. Yeah,
well, it's 3 generations at this stage. Yeah. Murray's dropped out of that cohort now with playing Davis Cup at the end of last year and playing his first match, and then wasn't able to continue, and now he's pulled out of the Aussie, and obviously his hip surgery that he had doesn't seem to be kind of happening for him, which is disappointing. So yeah, he's out of that race a little bit as of now.
Which leaves us with Federer having 20 Grand Slams, Nadal having 19, and Djokovic on 16. Yeah,
a lot can change with 1 point and 1 rally now with how they shake up with their legacies. It's like, you'll have a final potentially, or a semi-final, where these guys are going at it in the 5th set, and it can be a swing of a couple of Grand Slams. So it's incredible. One interesting point I heard made about the race for the Slams, though, and how far ahead these guys are compared to, say, a Borg or a Sampras or a McEnroe, is that when Borg was playing, and even when Sampras was playing, the world number 1 at the end of the year, that was a massive, massive thing, and that hasn't really been the case for these guys. They focus on accumulating Grand Slams. So Borg is saying, well, hey, look, if I had just focused on going down to Australia, which was actually quite a minor event in the 80s, I could have picked off 6 or 7 of those, and I'd be up at 16 or 17. And then Sampras he was year number 1 6 years in a row. So he would argue, well, look, Federer is able to pick and choose, and he's just trying to focus on these events. So it's a very valid point. So I think it skews what these guys are achieving a little bit. Like, what they're doing is still unbelievable, but I think they've almost left everything else to the side in the pursuit of accumulating Grand Slams, whereas the generations before weren't quite doing that.
That's very interesting. I hadn't heard that before. Golf has gone along a similar lines. Nobody really cares about the world number 1 title as much. It's diminished. It's all about the majors. So tennis has gone that way.
I think so, yeah. Well, it definitely has.
Have the post-Big Four generations, and we are into generations now, were they just a big disappointment and weren't an especially good batch compared to the last 30, 40 years, or is it just the greatness of the Big Four?
A little bit of both, I think. I've heard a theory that the tennis was so big with the Borg, McEnroe, Connors era in the early 80s. A lot of people kind of got into tennis with their kids and that in the early 80s, and that spawned these Djokovic's and Federers and Nadals who got into the sport. So it attracted more people, and then in the 90s it got a little bit stale and it was a lot of big serving, and maybe there was a generation that didn't get into tennis quite as much. There wasn't quite the interest, potentially something like that. But it's I think it's one of those things that these guys have pushed themselves on as well.
Who was the best of the bunch? Who was the main pretender to their thrones? Was it Del Potro? Was he about the pick?
Yeah, Del Potro won 1. Wawrinka's won 3, which is an amazing effort to go and be a multiple slam champion. But yeah, you kind of had your Tsongas, your Gasquets,
they always felt
your Monfises, but
they felt well short, didn't they?
And they knew it early on in their careers, and you feel like they underachieved just in the shadow and feeling like they weren't going to match up. Like Gasquet and Nadal would have been the same year growing up and would have been playing in the biggest sort of European junior events from 13 and 14, and they would have been swapping matches, and Gasquet would win one, but then Nadal, I think, he just developed into such an athlete. He dominated those guys from the age of 18, 19. And a guy like Gasquet was just kind of left in the wake, an unbelievably talented player who was winning ATP matches at 15, but then just didn't translate to that sort of Grand Slam winner kind of level.
The horrors in Australia at the moment obviously have been well documented. The raging fires continue, so the quality of the air has been an issue. They've set a certain limit where they don't play beyond if the air isn't quite good enough, but certainly probably something you can relate to. And Federer, I think, was accused by a fellow player of being selfish in this regard. The big names are being looked after, it seems, and playing at the right times when the air is good. And the have-nots, the lesser lights, are being thrown out there when it suits the tournament. Yeah,
I think the air quality was at its worst 7-8 days ago, right when the qualifying was due to start. And I think the perception that the players had was we're kind of treated as second-class citizens outside the top 100 during the year with our prize money and etc. And then we're kind of an afterthought here, should go out and play. It's only the qualifying. And they have a couple of days to play within qualifying, where they like to kind of qualify guys on the Friday, so they have a couple of days before the main draw starts, and they didn't use them. They just put them out on the first day as scheduled. There was a lot of disappointment from the players that they kind of felt like they weren't getting looked after the same way. So I think there was a communication breakdown as well. I don't think the players kind of understood how that air quality thing works. We know the heat rule is there and it's an X degrees, whereas air quality is something new. So everybody was sort of scrambling around trying to understand what was going on.
Yeah. We all know about the French Open and Wimbledon and the demands on the players there, different characteristics. So the US Open and the Australian Open, both on hard courts. Are there differences between the type of tennis that we see at both, or is it pretty similar?
US Open plays a little bit quicker. The courts are, I just feel like the atmosphere in the States, as in the air, it makes the ball fly a bit quicker, and the court surface is just that little bit quicker. So the guys are coming off usually a pretty punishing pre-season. So a lot of players actually overdo it. I think in the pre-season in December, they're like, this is my 3 or 4 week period that I get. It's the only time I get this in tennis because it's such a long season. And sometimes they kind of flog themselves and they pick up injuries and don't finish matches. You'll see lots of retirements in the Aussie Open. Whereas, again, a Federer or whatever, a bit more experience can manage that. And Melbourne, climate-wise, is a little bit strange. I mean, it can be 40 degrees one day and it can be blowing a gale and cold the next day. But again, the players kind of get looked after. You see, again, like Roger, when it was raining 2 days ago, was playing on Rod Laver with the roof closed. So he doesn't have to wait in the locker room for the whole day like the guys who are 80 in the world who have to, play on court 16 and hope for somebody to dry the courts. So again, he's done and dusted in an hour and a half back to the hotel. So all these things accumulate. He's a little bit better than the draw anyway, and then he's getting that first look on the big courts. So, all those things kind of add up.
Yeah, no doubt. The story on the women's side of the draw is Serena Williams. She's in as the favourite. I mean, it's remarkable. Like you said, same age as Federer, 38 years of age. She won her first tournament since giving birth a couple of weeks ago, kind of a tune-up for the Australian Open, which, by the way, now means Serena Williams has won a title in the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s and the 2020s. Her first title was an indoor tournament in Paris in 1999, back when the lads were winning the treble. So it's just extraordinary. She won her 23rd Grand Slam in 2017. Her child is 2 years old now. So she's been back. Serena's at a really interesting point, back since kind of early 2018, which about 6 months after giving birth, and has made a number of Grand Slam finals. Obviously the Osaka one, people remember that at the US Open.
Yep.
Kerber at Wimbledon, Halep as well in 2019. I think another US Open in 2019. So she's getting to finals. It's still very competitive.
No, she's trying to equal Margaret Court's record of Grand Slams. So she's like the guys. She's trying to break records in the Grand Slam numbers as well. And yeah, she's been at one behind Margaret Court for whatever you say, 3 years, and factoring in the pregnancy and the birth, and then, as I say, a year and a half of making finals of slams and not quite getting over the line. So pressure is probably building.
Is there any consensus about her play diminishing? I appreciate the pressure of Court's record maybe being a factor in finals, but is she diminished as a player?
A little bit, yeah. She doesn't move like she was 10 years ago. Her serve is probably getting back to a better place now. It was a phenomenal shot for so long. I don't think she had the same rhythm on it in the last year or so, but it looks a bit better again.
Right.
And she needs to rely on that because her movement isn't quite the same. So I wouldn't put her as the favourite.
The firm favourite.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I feel like Ashley Barty is going to be the one to beat. Obviously Australian, had a great year last year, won the warm-up tournament in Adelaide last week. You know, she's very comfortable there. The Australians tend not to do great. Like Hewitt never won Aussie Open. Sam Stosur, who was #1 in the world and won the French, never won Aussie Open. Pat Rafter, never. Like the Aussies tend not to do great there. But I feel like she's the type of person who might be able to feed off the energy of the crowd, and you know, I kind of like her for the tournament, and she's great to watch. Loads of variety as well. So yeah, I think she might do it. But look, obviously Serena's going to be thereabouts.
It's incredibly open, the women's draw generally over the last couple of years. We're seeing lots of first-time winners, very, not too many dominant forces. Or
yeah, like Osaka came in last year and won it, and we were thinking maybe is she going to take this on for the next 2 or 3 years, and it didn't happen.
Who is going to? Who's the dominant force in women's tennis?
It's harder in the women I think to dominate in the slams. Like the guys are playing best of 5 sets, so they can have a wobble for 20, 30 minutes and they can claw it back, whereas the women don't have that luxury. If they play a bad set and they're in big trouble. So that means that there's going to be more upsets, and then obviously the players know that going into the match. There's that little bit more pressure, and the opponents have a bit more belief. But if you go down a set against Nadal, you've got a long way to go.
Yeah.
Whereas you play a good hour 15 against in a women's match, you're right back in it. So there's that. But yeah, there's I guess a bit more depth. The guys are just that bit further ahead at the top level of the men's to the rest of the pack, and the women there's probably 15 or so who can legitimately win one.
And within the game, for those of us, obviously, there's the Williams era, I suppose, for quite some time, and then you're back into the 90s and suddenly getting into Steffi Graf territory. Are the current batch and the current generation seen as strong? Is it a good group? Like, is the quality of tennis that you're watching seen as... the men has been a golden age. Is it in that territory?
Well, you see, the thing is, it's difficult to kind of create those iconic players if they're only going to win 1 or 2 slams. Even if you could stack them up against Steffi Graf as a tennis player and they're as good.
Okay.
But, you create a bit of a mystique and a dynasty and what have you when you win your 8 or 9 slams. So it's going to be very hard for Simona Halep, who's an incredible player and has won, I think, 2 or 3 slams, to be looked back on in 20, 30 years like Steffi. But, maybe toe-to-toe she would have been as good, So it's a tricky one. It's really tough to compare those generations.
You almost need to win 8 or 9 or 10 for the general sporting public to get your name.
It is, yeah. Well, Wimbledon is definitely the one. Like, if you win Australia, you're still... in certain parts of the world, you're still not really anybody, but Wimbledon will bring you into that level of stardom, I suppose.
And Conor, who's the pros pro at the moment? What tennis player, if they're playing first round or final or anywhere in between, you like to make a point of watching?
Tsitsipas. He's
Greek.
he's charismatic. He's got that one-handed backhand. He's a little bit volatile. He's a bit unpredictable, but he's got a lot of game, and he's 21, and I think he's nearly there. Beat Federer at the Aussie Open last year, but he's got a great game, a really nice game to watch. So
he's worth catching over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, a lot of people like watching Kyrgios. But for me, it's kind of the same old story. I just know he's not going to get it done. You know, you like a guy with the entertainment factor who you think can actually go and mentally go and win a slam or get to a final, whereas Kyrgios is kind of
you're not investing in him.
A third, fourth round guy, yeah.
There's a nice bit of jeopardy, though, that anything tantrum-wise or otherwise could happen at any moment.
Yeah, there's a bit of that, yeah.
Cheap thrills.
He's actually gotten big behind he's raising a lot of money for the bushfire.
Every serve or something.
And every ace,
yeah.
a couple of grand goes towards it. So people are saying that he might have a better week than usual, because he's quite an emotional guy, and I think he's really behind this. So he's one that brings the crowds anyway.
The grumpy man in me, I must admit, heard about the ace thing and thought, don't make a spectacle out of people's lives being ruined. Just give them money.
Yeah. If I don't hit an ace, somebody nicks it with their racket, that nobody gets any money.
Yeah. Hawkeye, sorry, no money.
You're right, but I think they've raised $5 million for the in the rally for relief, so they are getting it done. In fairness,
you don't think Kyrgios then will win a Grand Slam at any stage?
No, I don't think he's got the mental capability. His movement as well is a little bit suspect. His serve is phenomenal. He's got a top 2 or top 3 in the world serve. Great forehand as well, but yeah, mentally not there, and movement wise not there either.
Okay.
I think those two things are related. I think he kind of knows he doesn't quite have that mobility, and that affects him then belief wise, and that sort of ties into his mentality a little bit out there as well, I think.
Okay, well, we'll see how it all goes. Maybe pop back in around finals weekend. And
there's more to talk about at the end of the week sometimes than the start of the week, but hopefully it's kind of judged on the second week of Slam a lot of the time as well. So yeah, love to come back.
Great. Conor Niland, Football Show next.